Hello, everyone. This is Kerwin, and welcome to another episode of What's Happening in Travel with Kushwin and Kerwin. Kushwa is not here today, so it's just me by myself. And today we're going to talk about fifth freedom flights. Now, in the last podcast, in episode 90, I actually spoke about seeing the airplane, which is actually my background, which is Ethiopian Airlines, Boeing 787, I think it's a dash nine, that goes between Oslo and Stockholm on its way to Ethiopia, Addis, Ethiopia, and back. And so this week I thought it would be interesting if we spoke about some of the flights that I found over time. And while I've been doing the research, what I've noticed is that a lot of them aren't flying anymore. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and I will talk through this so the folks that are listening to the podcast won't have an issue. So what I'm doing is I'm using the booking engine or the schedule engine on passrider.com. And I did a bunch of them already just so it makes it easier. So the first one I'm going to talk about is from Sydney to Auckland. And if you go on the booking engine passrider.com and you type in Sydney to Auckland, it'll give you the results. Now, note that if you don't see any of these flights, it either means that they're not daily or they're not operating. On the website, it has a feature that you can use to say, I want a 7-day schedule or a daily. This particular one I'm looking at is actually the daily, but I'll show you what the schedule ones look like eventually. So if we look at the Sydney to Auckland flight, we see that there's first a Qantas flight, then a Qantas, and an Air New Zealand, then a Qantas, then a LAN Chile between Sydney and Auckland. How is that possible? So what is for you to understand why that's possible, you need to understand what is a fifth freedom flight. I think there might be about 6 different freedoms, and we'll probably have another podcast that will explain all the different freedoms. But for this one, we're going to talk about the fifth freedom. What the fifth freedom does, it says you can fly between country A and country B, and you can carry passengers even if your airline is not based in country A or country B. Typically, what happens is that if you're flying from country A to country B, you're either an airline that's based in country A or based in country B. So you have the rights. And then what the countries do is they give each other rights to fly between the two countries. Now, in the fifth freedom rights, it says, hey, even though you are not from country A or from country B, you can fly between the two routes and you can take passengers. So you can sell tickets. Now, how does this happen, or why does it even make sense for the airlines to do this? If you look at the example for the example for LAN, which is what we're looking at right now, it's LAN 800. It goes between Sydney and Auckland, and it's a 787-900. What's happening is this particular airline in this particular direction, it's going Sydney to Auckland, and then from Auckland, it's going to Santiago. So as a customer, you can buy a ticket from Sydney to Santiago with a stop in Auckland. You don't have to if you get off, it's because they need to clean the planes. In some places, you do have to get off because there's immigration, there's customs, and one of the agreements is if you're passing through, then all passengers have to deplane, and so you have to go through that. So whenever that happens, the airline will clean the planes, and sometimes what will happen is that between on that smaller segment, because in this case, Sydney to Auckland is much shorter than Auckland to Santiago. So on the shorter segment, they will have a more diminished service. Now this is pretty. How long is this one? It's 3 hours and 5 minutes. So it's the shorter segment, but it is quite long. Normally the tags is what they call them, about an hour or so, or 2 hours. But this particular one is, and I'll show you some other ones that's out there that are a little shorter. So this one and LAN, which is used to be called LAN Chile. but now it's just LAN. They are based in Santiago. So they are not based in Australia and they're not based in New Zealand. But the Australia and the New Zealand government have given them permission to fly between there. Now there are other airlines that fly between this segment, i.e. Qantas and Air New Zealand and probably Jetstar, yeah, are the ones that fly through there. But the government looks at the traffic and they're like, well, if we allow this airline to do that, then it won't adversely affect the other airlines from the two countries that are serving that particular market. And typically it's like one flight a day. And so it won't make that much of a difference. And most of the passengers anyway, people are not buying tickets between Australia and Sydney online. They're typically buying Qantas or Jetstar or Air New Zealand. The people who are flying between there are either going from Sydney to Auckland. Well, sorry, not Sydney to Auckland. They're typically going from Sydney all the way to Santiago, or from Auckland all the way to Santiago and back. So I hope that explains the Fifth Freedom. So that's the one down there. Now, there used to be a lot more because Emirates used to be on this market. I actually took an Emirates A380 from Auckland to Sydney because I got bumped off of a flight once and I went and I had to buy a ticket. And I bought that ticket on Emirates and flew Auckland to Sydney on the A380. Very nice flight. Another market we're going to look at is Buenos Aires, which is EZE, to Santiago, Chile. We just talked about Santiago in the previous one. Now, this one, I've flown on, I think it was LAN. I did Santiago to Buenos Aires. And the cool stuff was I was actually catching a British Airways flight that's going to go from Santiago to Heathrow. The issue was I was working for Continental at the time and I couldn't get out of Santiago to save my life. So I said, hey, let me look at the tags that are around there. And at that time, the other tags that flew that market was not at the time that would work for me because BA actually flies that tag, but landed. So I flew in a LAN. It was an A340, I think it was. And the cool stuff was I landed and then they were actually already boarding that flight. And if I had entered the country and gone through transit and come back out, I would have missed it. So I'm walking by and we pretty much parked right next to the BA7, I think it was 777 at the time. And I went up to the gate and I spoke to the lady and I said, hey, I need to get on this flight. I'm going to London. And she goes, okay, you can show me all your documents. I showed her all my documents. And so she accepted me through. So I was able to connect without going through the transit area. This was way back when. So that actually worked out really well. But in this market, there is KLM is the one that's flying from Ezeiza, which is EZE, which is in Buenos Aires, Argentina, to Santiago, Chile. It's a 2 hour and 10-minute flight, KL 701, and it's on a 789. Now, the cool thing about this is you can buy a ticket on that flight, a KLM ticket. You can also buy a ticket in business class. So if you wanted to experience a KLM business class seats, not necessarily the service because you're not going to get the full service. You will get probably a meal because it's 2 hours. So you probably get a nice meal and things like that. But you may not get like the proper amenity kits and all the cool stuff that you would get on the longer haul, because the longer haul of that flight is going to go from Santiago all the way to Amsterdam. So this flight actually does Buenos Aires, Santiago, Amsterdam, and on the way back it does the same thing: Amsterdam, Santiago, Buenos Aires, and then it goes back. So this is kind of how these flights operate. On this particular market, there aren't any others on that that are running. It's just a KLM flight that's doing that. Everything else is local, either to Buenos Aires or to South or somewhere in South America, because the South American carriers have different agreements that they can fly between these countries. Let's see. Look at another one, and this one. I was trying to find one in the Caribbean, and there doesn't seem to be any more. I thought there was one between like Grenada and Barbados, maybe. I'm gonna check that one. Um, and let's see, is there any? I know Virgin Atlantic does one, and try as I may, I was really searching for one. I couldn't find any. So now I'm going to try Grenada to Antigua, and nothing is coming up for Grenada to Antigua. Um, but there are some in the Caribbean. I just flew one and it's not operating anymore. It was on British Airways from Antigua to Providenciales. And I know that they do exist, um, but they're not showing up, which means that they're either seasonal or they've stopped them. Um, and I can't find another one that works in the Caribbean. They're just not showing up. But like I said, I did do Gatwick to Providence to Antigua and then Antigua to Providenciales. And so the Antigua to Providenciales would be the piece, that's the tag. And you could actually have bought a ticket on that. Um, Trying to think of another routing. I even tried St. Vincent because I did see one. There was a Virgin Atlantic flight from St. Vincent, and I think it went let's see. And that's on the Liat and into Caribbean. And maybe it was Barbados. I think it was. Um, all right, let's see. There's British Airways, Liat, Intercar. No, so I'm not seeing any of those. And what will happen is that sometime they're only in the Caribbean. I mean, in the summer that you'll see them. But let's go to another market. This other route is from Bangkok to Hong Kong. So Bangkok to Hong Kong have some pretty good ones on there. There is the first one is Ethiopian. Ethiopian 608 flies twice a week on a 787-800. And it goes from 787-8, 2 hours and 45 minutes from Bangkok to Hong Kong, leaves at 1 o'clock, arrives at 4:45. I guess it's a 1 hour time change in there. And also Emirates 384, which is an A380, 3 hour and 5 minute flight, it says. And the rest are local carriers. So there's Cathay because they're based in Hong Kong. There is who's HB? There's also Thai, of course. HB is Great Bay Airlines. So these are all local airlines out there. Then there's also one called FD, which is Thai Airways Asia. So that's based in Bangkok. And there's Hong Kong Airlines. So these are all local airlines to either country. Now let's go one more. And we're going to go look at Singapore to Sydney. I actually flew this route on my British Airways 777. This is a 7 hour and 40 minute flight. Now, this flight, it's part of what's called the Kangaroo route. Kangaroo route is from Australia to the UK. And Qantas is actually working on what's called the Qantas, I think it's called the Sunrise flights. So they want to do nonstop, and they've tested it nonstop from Australia all the way to the UK. And so they're creating a special, it's like an A350 with different seat configuration and things like that, so they can do the sunrise flights because it's going to be quite long, a little 18 hours plus, I think it is. But this particular route from Singapore to Sydney, the first leg, so there's Singapore Airlines and there is Scoot, which Scoot has actually changed their code to TR. Used to be TZ, which was the same as American Transair, so it's quite interesting. Singapore, British Airways, flight 15 on a 787-9. Oh, I keep wanting to say 900. 787-9. 7 hours and 45 minutes. And when it gets to Sydney, it does Singapore to Sydney, but it was coming from London. So it does London to Singapore and then Singapore to Sydney. And then there's also Qantas on that routing. Let's look at another one. Or is that the last one? Nope, there's another one. So from Oslo to Stockholm, this is the one for the airplane that's in my background. So this is the one where Ethiopian flies from Oslo at 7:45, arrive in Stockholm at 8:50. Flight's only an hour and 5 minutes. ET 715, which is a 787-9. And my friend of mine just took this flight and he said that they didn't do like a meal or anything like that. It was very kind of, low keyed. I had actually flown LAN from Madrid to Frankfurt, and I checked that one earlier, and it's not operating anymore. It was on was it LAN? No, it wasn't LAN. It was actually Aeromexico that flew that route. Or was it LAN? I think it was actually LAN that flew that. So that just kind of these flights are all over. They used to be a JFK to Vancouver on Cathay, and it would do JFK Vancouver, and then Vancouver to Hong Kong. Now, COVID-19 killed a lot of these flights that were out there. There even used to be one on, I think it was Air China, or was it China Airlines? One of those airlines from Houston to Panama City. And I wanted to take that, never took it. COVID came and it's not available anymore. So whenever you see these flights around, just go do them. The fares are normally a lot cheaper. So for example, the Ethiopian flight was like $70 or some $60, $70 in economy, but in business it was like 600. When I took I think it was line from Madrid to Frankfurt, it was how much was it now? It was about $140 for business class that it was. So there are a number of these around. I hope you get a chance to check them out. And if you have any others that I've missed, because I know I've missed a lot of them, just leave a note in the comments, or send me an email at feedback@passrider.com and let me know if you know of any of those. Let me just stop my screen share. So that's kind of all we have for this week. I did have one other thought though. I was on a flight recently, and this lady, I heard the agent say to her, "Hey, you can't board the flight." She's like, "What do you mean I can't board the flight?" She was kind of loud. And I think he didn't say it loud because I didn't hear him, but I think he mentioned that she was inebriated. And she goes, "But I only had," and she was very staggering and, drunk voice. "I only had one Bloody Mary." And she was actually louder before, and so much so that they called for her to board the flight, and she never got up because she was in a wheelchair, and then a wheelchair guy left her, and then but she could walk. She just can't walk very far. And they were saying, "Hey, if you're needing a little extra time to board the plane, blah blah blah, you can do this." And she didn't budge. And I was wondering why she didn't budge. So then the guy came over and he was talking to her, and she's like very loud. She's like, "You're making fun of me. You're gonna make people do this and do that." And I'm like, "No, you're kind of doing that all on your own, lady." And she was making all this noise, and of course she was causing the scene, and the guy that you cannot board the flight. And she's like, "What do you mean I can't board the flight? I've been waiting all morning," and the guy's like, "You can't board the flight." So she's, getting upset. And she came over and she touched him, and the guy's like, "Don't touch me. Please don't touch me." And so she kind of backed up a little bit. And then, she said, "Well, give me my money back." And the guy is just done with her because at this point she's really getting weird. And the eventually she goes, "Well, I'm not going anyway." And she stormed off, and then away she went. So I tell you that story to say that don't drink before your flight, because if the agents recognize that you're inebriated, you will not be able to board that flight. So just make sure that, if your flight's delayed, don't go to the bar. Or if you go to the bar, don't drink a lot. Because if you're drunk, or the agent can detect that you've been drinking and you can't hold you. Because the problem is that they don't want you to get on the flight and then create problems on the flight. Because if you're drunk before you get on the flight, no. So what typically happens is they make you sit down somewhere, and then when you sober up, they try to book you on a new flight. And the whole idea is for you to sober up so you can go, not for you to go and drink your sorrows away again. So be careful out there. So that's all I got this week. If you got any comments or anything like that, send me a note. And it's a short episode this week. So this is Kerwin with what's happening in travel. And have a good flight and see you soon.